All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're doing something wild. We are compressing thousands of years of history into an epic race to rank China's most fascinating dynasties by power, wealth, and longevity. Now, just to give you some quick perspective here, China had more dynasties than Europe had empires. The sheer scale of history we're looking at is honestly absolutely staggering. We're talking about dynasties rising and falling like massive waves across millennia.
To really understand the massive stakes involved in this historical arena, I want you to think about this number, 60%. Consider that one single dynasty controlled an unbelievable 60% of the global GDP. That's more than half of the entire world's economic wealth concentrated under just one ruling family. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. But you know, wealth and raw power, they don't always equal longevity. Contrast that staggering wealth with another infamous empire that completely collapsed in just 15 short years. Seriously, 15! They built massive world wonder monuments, standardized an entire culture, and then basically just blinked out of existence in less time than it takes to raise a kid.
And here's something that really surprised me. The very dynasty that revolutionized the entire world with paper, gunpowder, and the compass, they didn't even crack our top 3. I mean, you'd think that inventing the literal technologies that shaped the modern world would guarantee you the top spot on any historical leaderboard, right? But, as we're about to discover, Chinese history is way more complicated than that.
So, to keep things fair, we're judging and ranking these historical heavyweights based on 3 strict metrics: military power, economic wealth, and total survival time. We are going to see exactly how these massive empires balanced, or in some cases completely and utterly failed to balance, these 3 crucial pillars. Okay, moving into our first group, the short-lived empires.
Let's start at the bottom of the list. The Qin, the Xin, and the Sui dynasties paint a really clear picture of rapid failure. These empires burned out incredibly fast because they built way too much, way too brutally. They barely lasted a generation despite undertaking massive, mind-boggling projects. Take the Xin dynasty, for instance. It lasted a mere 9 years. 9! All because they tried to reform currency and redistribute land overnight, which, surprise, surprise, led to total economic collapse. Or the Sui dynasty, lasting just 38 years despite building the 1,800-kilometer Grand Canal. Why? Because they entirely bankrupted their treasury with 4 failed invasions of Korea.
But the absolute most famous of these quick failures is definitely the Qin. Now, the brutal Qin unified China for the very first time. They built the Great Wall. They built the incredible terracotta army. They even standardized currency and writing. It's a massive resume. But their empire evaporated into rebellion the literal moment their terrifying first emperor accidentally poisoned himself. Why? Because he was eating mercury pills, genuinely believing they were the elixir of immortality. You really have to appreciate the dark historical irony there. The exact thing he took to live forever is what killed him and his empire. Their fatal flaw was simple. They were too brutal and too fast. They ruled entirely by fear, and when the emperor died, that fear just vanished, leaving literally nothing to hold the state together.
That brings us to our next tier: rich but vulnerable, the middle class.
Moving up our ranking, we find dynasties that were stable and extraordinarily wealthy, but suffered from some tragic strategic choices. The Song dynasty illustrates this perfectly. They boasted a massive economic GDP. I mean, they were incredibly rich. They had unimaginably advanced technology, inventing paper money, movable type, the compass. But on the flip side, they had practically zero military spending. They actually had the technology to dominate with gunpowder and advanced chips, but they used their gunpowder for fireworks and parades. They preferred to just pay tribute to their enemies rather than actually fight them. It proves a really hard historical lesson. Wealth without power just makes you a huge target. And unsurprisingly, they ended up losing half of China to barbarian invaders twice.
Similarly, we have the Ming dynasty. They lasted a very respectable 276 years, but they made a catastrophic strategic choice. They built the breathtaking Forbidden City. They built a world-dominating navy way before Europe's Age of Discovery, sending these massive 9-masted treasure fleets all the way across the Indian Ocean to Africa. And then, they inexplicably burned their own ships. Seriously? One emperor decided the ocean was just too dangerous, so they banned maritime trade, turned entirely inward, and built physical walls out of fear. Much of the Great Wall we see today is actually from the Ming. It's beautiful, sure, but it was essentially a massive monument to their own fear of the outside world.
Now we enter the top 5, the imperial heavyweights. These are the true heavyweight dynasties that possessed unparalleled wealth and military dominance, fundamentally shaping what China means today.
The Han, Tang, and Yuan dynasties balanced incredible military strength with massive cultural influence, ruling over golden ages of integration and expansion. The Han dynasty lasted 400 years and actually gave China its very name, establishing state Confucianism and a massive civil service. The Tang dynasty, lasting 289 years, was China's ultimate golden age of poetry and cosmopolitanism. Their capital city had 1 million people, and it was this vibrant hub where Persian merchants and Korean students walked the exact same streets.
However, even these titans had fatal single points of failure. Take the wealthy and deeply cultured Tang dynasty. They lost 13 million people to the devastating An Lushan rebellion. Just let that number sink in. 13 million. A single general, who was highly favored by the emperor, rebelled and nearly wiped out the entire dynasty in a 7-year conflict. It was one of the most devastating conflicts of the ancient world, turning a thriving civilization into a hemorrhage of population and power in the blink of an eye.
And then we have the incredibly powerful Yuan dynasty. This was the shortest of the top 5, lasting 97 years, but arguably the most fiercely powerful. Established by the Mongol conqueror Kublai Khan, they conquered all of China and ruled it from Beijing. They even tried to invade Japan twice, though massive storms, which the Japanese called kamikaze or divine wind, destroyed their fleets. But despite all this raw military might, they fell apart in under a century. Why? Because they ruled purely as conquerors. They never assimilated into Chinese culture, and eventually the people just rebelled and drove them out entirely.
Which brings us to the twist, the #1 dynasty. Now, what's really fascinating here is that our ultimate winner wasn't the richest or the most powerful by a long shot. Taking the absolute #1 spot in our ranking is the highly influential yet extremely counterintuitive Zhou dynasty. You probably wouldn't have guessed it, but they are the foundational bedrock of Chinese history.
Dwarfing every other empire we've covered today, the Zhou outlasted Rome's entire existence twice over. They survived an astonishing 800 years, from 1046 BC all the way to 256 BC. They survived the chaotic Warring States period. They watched their own regional lords grow powerful, fight each other, and completely ignore the emperor, and yet the Zhou survived it all.
So, how exactly did they do it? Well, they survived this long because they literally invented China's political DNA, the mandate of heaven. This was an absolute stroke of genius. It's the political theory that an emperor rules not by blood or absolute power, but because heaven grants legitimacy based entirely on moral virtue. It meant rebellion was actually justified if an emperor was corrupt, placing moral legitimacy way above brute force.
By fully embracing this concept of strategic weakness, they acted as ritual figureheads. They were more like religious symbols. Think a pope rather than a king. While regional warlords brutally fought each other for territory and resources, the Zhou emperor calmly performed rituals and maintained legitimacy. Like the quote says, they let others fight, they let others govern. They provided meaning rather than strict control. And by not trying to micromanage a vast military state, they managed to outlast absolutely everyone else.
So what actually lasts?
This entire explainer really brings us to a profound realization about the true nature of power and legacy. While the formidable physical walls of the brief 15-year Qin dynasty and the vast treasure fleets of the Ming are long gone, the powerful philosophical ideas forged by the supposedly weak Zhou are still referenced 3,000 years later. Physical empires, no matter how intimidating, crumble. Treasuries empty, and raw power evaporates the second the fear is gone. But lasting ideas, concepts of legitimacy, virtue, and philosophical meaning, those survive for millennia. The Zhou literally won history without having to conquer it.
I want to leave you with this final thought today to spark some debate in the comments. After looking at thousands of years of the greatest dynasties on Earth, what's your strategy for a legacy? If you had to choose, would you rather be a brief, blinding flash of absolute power like the Qin, imposing your will on the world for just 15 years, or would you rather embrace strategic weakness, create a lasting idea, and be remembered like the Zhou for 3,000 years? It's a fascinating question about human nature, isn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.